part of this journey. We are delighted today to be able to launch this new 5th edition of utilization-focused evaluation as an intergenerational effort that Charmaine and I collaborated on. There are now a handful of second-generation evaluators who entered the field, and I think that bodes well for the future. So we're going to give you some history about utilization-focused evaluation over the editions, give you a glimpse into the content of the new edition, and end with a closing song and tribute. So we're going to begin with Charmaine offering a land acknowledgement.
Morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Before I do the land acknowledgement, I want to also just tell you a little bit about the cover that we chose. You'll notice there are cattails on the cover and in our new logo. We were inspired by reading Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer to learn about the many uses of cattails, particularly by Indigenous communities. They can be eaten, they can be used as diapers, they can be used to build shelter. So we thought that that was an appropriate metaphor for utilization-focused evaluation. So you'll see cattails kind of flowing throughout our UFE work in the coming years. So utilization-focused evaluation's roots are in Minnesota, Makoche, Minnesota, the homeland of the Dakota people, who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. Many Anishinaabe people also call this land home, having followed the Miggy's shell to the food that grows on the water, the wild rice. Indigenous people from other Native communities and nations also reside in Minnesota and have made innumerable contributions to this beautiful region.
Yes, yes.
Michael and I are settlers on this land. Our ancestors came to what became called the United States from Ireland, England, and Scotland. They participated in and benefited from the attempted genocide of Native people, the enslavement of sub-Saharan Africans. They broke promises. And despite centuries of colonial theft and violence, we know that this is still Indigenous land. And it will always be Indigenous land. We also know that we have a responsibility to interrupt the generational legacies of colonialism, racism, and genocide that we have continued to benefit from, and to do better. Indigenous people continue to demonstrate their gifts amidst a backdrop of ongoing colonialism and oppression. This image is a map created by Dakota artist Marlena Miles that shows the land in and around what is now known as the Twin Cities, where I live, marking important Native landmarks and locations. We also want to acknowledge that this book launch is taking place just before the deer shed their antlers full moon of November and during Indigenous Peoples Month. We also know that land acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. So we have made a commitment to redistributing royalties from this edition of the book to support Indigenous language, scholarship, and movement building. In particular, Dakota Yapi Okodaki Chie, which is a group working on Dakota language revitalization, and the Indigenous Environmental Network. So with that, I welcome you to also put in the chat where you are coming from, your name and where you're joining us from, as we transition over to Michael to give us a little history lesson.
Thank you, Charmaine, for grounding us in that context. Charmaine dug up some old pictures of me to accompany this history. The first edition of utilization-focused evaluation came out in 1978 and was based upon research we were doing in the new evaluation methodology program at the University of Minnesota, where I came as a postdoc and then took over as director of that program, one of the early programs created with NIMH funding to begin training evaluators. We did a study of federal evaluation use and found that the factors that affected use were not methodological, were not size, were not findings, but were really being sensitive to the political context and what we came to call the personal factor, that there were identifiable people who actually cared about the results. The second edition that came out in 1986, when I was without beard, was where we introduced the phrase intended use by intended users and defined what utilization meant. That came from engagement with a number of scholars and researchers on evaluation use who I had the honor to interact with. And the emphasis on coming up with a way of defining what constituted utilization was a driving force behind the second edition. The third edition came out in 1997. I'm back with beard at that point. And you see about every 10 years doing a new edition. The major breakthrough in the third edition was recognition of process use for the first time. We had been within the field narrowly focused upon using findings and had focused all our attention on that. Every evaluation I've ever done, I follow up to find out how it was used. And in interviewing people and finding out what they did with the evaluation, they would often say, well, we used this finding or this recommendation, but not this one so much. But what was really useful was going through the process, because utilization-focused evaluation involves taking people through an evaluation collaborative process. And they would say what was really useful was what we learned from that process. And in preparing the third edition and going back through all those notes, it finally dawned on me that the process of evaluation can be as useful and sometimes more useful than findings. Findings deteriorate quickly, processes and the capacity built endures. That led to the fourth edition, which came out in 2008, where we were then beginning as a field to engage with complexity concepts, more systems thinking, international and cross-cultural expansion of evaluation. And these became woven through the 2008 edition of the book. So about every 10 years, since 1978, we've done a new edition, and I've done those on my own. And I'm thrilled now in this new edition to be doing it with Charmaine. And here you see a picture of my grandson, who will perhaps be a third generation evaluator. So we're going to take you through some of the highlights of how the new book is organized and what we've done with it. In addition to being the perspectives of my 50 years in evaluation and the important new perspectives that Charmaine brings from her generation, we have organized a book around principles instead of steps. The prior books, including Essentials of Utilization-Focused Evaluation 2015, were based upon a set of steps. And that was never entirely comfortable because it's not really a linear process. So you just do one step and then the next step. And so what we've done is identified minimum specifications for what a utilization-focused evaluation needs to do, what are called min specs, and 10 principles of utilization-focused evaluation, and added a major focus on equity and sustainability as utilization-focused evaluation criteria. And that's what we're going to share with you here, and then give a chance for you to ask questions and make comments before we close out. So thank you all for joining us, and let's start looking at what the book holds, what it has for us.
Okay, so before we do that, we have a few trivia questions interspersed just to kind of liven things up. And so you've got your history lesson, and I'm gonna see if my poll feature is working because I think I messed it up. Okay, no, here. So I'm gonna launch this poll, and the question is, how many years after the first edition of UFE was published was I born? Give you a minute here. Still a little bit of voting going on. Don't worry, I won't be offended if you think I'm older or younger than I am. All right. So I'm a little older than the majority of you think I am, but the answer was 1981, which was 3 years. So there you have it. And we will move on to highlights. We're gonna start with min specs. You wanna tell us a little bit about that?
You take in the poll.
Did I end it? Did I not end it?
No, it still shows on the screen.
Just click the box and close it, I think is what you have to do. Is that true or
okay. No? Yeah, I did.
Okay, great.
Right.
Great. Close your polls if you haven't already.
Okay. So we begin with this notion of min specs. One of the issues that has become fairly major of all kinds of evaluation models and approaches is the issue of fidelity. I have a Google alert about utilization-focused evaluation. I get sent lots of evaluations that headline themselves as utilization-focused over the years. And in many cases, it's hard to see what about them makes them utilization-focused. The approach has been around long enough and has a certain cachet that in many cases, people simply take on the phrase and say, we're doing a utilization-focused evaluation. So as Charmaine and I began working, we thought we ought to take a look at what are the minimum things that have to be included in the evaluation to truly consider it utilization-focused. And so the book opens with these 5 minimum specifications. The first is honoring the personal factor to identify and engage primary users. We get lots of evaluations called utilization-focused evaluation, but can't tell who it's for. And those of you who know the personal factor, that means concrete specific people, not an evaluation done for the feds or not an evaluation done for the World Bank. Specific people who are going to make specific decisions and take specific actions. People who care about the findings and will use them for action. The second min spec is that the evaluation focuses on their priority concerns. What do they need to do with the evaluation? There are lots and lots of potential uses for our evaluation, way beyond the original formative summative distinctions, developmental evaluations, accountability, monitoring, transformation, equity. And so being clear about what intended users are going to do becomes a focus for utilization. Process use, facilitating being active, reactive, interactive, and adaptive in engaging users. So the process of working with users is a min spec. Take a full journey focus. Focus on use from the beginning to end and every step along the way. We find that historically, a lot of people think that use is something you worry about after you've done the evaluation. You've got findings. Now, what do we do with it? A min spec of utilization-focused evaluation is to begin thinking about and engaging in use from the very beginning, from the moment that the evaluation is conceived and commissioned. And finally, a new one, inspired partly by the coronavirus, but by experiences over the years with developmental evaluation and our increasingly changing world, is adapting to context changes. That utilization is not a fixed destination. When the context for an evaluation changes, the evaluation may need to change. There's been a huge amount of pivoting because of the coronavirus and the use of evaluations, turnover in primary intended users, changes in evaluator situations. And so we've identified as a min spec the adapting to context changes. Min specs, what is essential, these 5 principles we consider the core of utilization-focused evaluation. And there's a chapter, early chapter devoted to that, that shows in graphic form, knowing who the evaluation is for and what its uses are the beginning points to engage with users, focusing on youth throughout, with the umbrella of monitoring and adapting to context along the way as we learn more about what's going on.
All right, so we are gonna pause for questions in a little bit, but first we're going to do one more trivia question. This question is, what is the name of Michael's inner voice introduced in the 2nd edition of UFE called? And I am going to pull up your poll. All right, let's see how you all did. All right, so 46% of you got it right. And Michael, do you want to tell us anything about how come?
Well, how come was inspired by an early evaluation I did with an Outward Bound-like program, leadership training for higher education administrators in the wilderness, that was run by Hal and Malcolm, and working with them and our discussions about the meaning of evaluation and drawing upon some Sufi tales and ancient wisdom, created the term how come as a way of telling philosophical stories about issues that illuminate aspects of evaluation. Sufi stories, other ancient wisdom stories, indigenous peoples' stories that were relevant, modern stories, creation stories. And how come, when said slowly, is how come, as in why. These are how come stories, why stories that are a way of getting at the philosophical nature of the underpinnings of evaluation, our values and fundamental assumptions and premises.
All right, so the second part of the book presents the single overarching principle of utilization-focused evaluation, which is focused on intended use by and with intended users in every aspect of and at every stage of an evaluation. And then following that overarching principle, there are 10 operating principles with 1 chapter devoted to each. And the reason that we came from steps to principles is really thinking about this not as a linear process, but as a set of guiding factors that really need to be considered all along the way. So we'll show you the 10 principles. We're not going to walk through every single one right now, but Michael, are there any that you want to call attention to or talk about?
Well, the first one of contextualization is actually illustrated with Charmaine's opening with the land acknowledgement, and recognizing both in geographically, culturally, politically, economically, the situation in which evaluation occurs. And we find that a lot of evaluators jump into design and methods right away without appreciating and doing the deep work around context. Personalizing, customizing, you've already heard some from the min specs. Looking at aligning questions and methods prioritizing use, engaging users. The big one that's emerged again from our recent work, and as Charmaine and I talked about these and decided which 10 to actually include, mobilize and or adapting, watch for, be alert to, and adapt to change circumstances, shifting priorities, turnover, reallocation of resources, change timelines. Adapting become a major theme. The importance of follow through, that evaluation use doesn't just happen. So it's not, the report is not the end. That's an output. It's what actually happens to findings that is the basis of use. And so mobilizing follow through and being accountable ourselves for reflecting and learning becomes a major principle of utilization-focused evaluation. It was hard to narrow it down to the 10. Charmaine and I had lots of discussions about which ones to include. We had some others that are embedded within these chapters, but these became for us the most important operating principles within the overarching principle.
And this is just another graphic to kind of show you how it all fits together. So you've got that overarching UFE principle kind of as foundation, and those min specs is, you know, the core, and then the operating principles are guiding the whole process towards evaluation use. I'm going to pause right now and see if there are any questions about the principles or the transition to a principles-based approach. You can put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I think you can unmute yourself and do that. And I will say, as we're just pausing for a moment here, you know, a lot of people, when they update books, it's just sort of an update. This is pretty much a whole different book than the 4th edition, but all of the resources from the 4th edition that were sort of taken out, like that are still relevant, are available online. And so we've tried to sort of give a lot of new content without giving you a 1,000-page book. And so, but keeping the other information available is important to us. So it won't go away. It's just in a different format.
Yeah, Sage has worked with us to have a site where we can, and on our utilization-focused evaluation website, where the steps are accessible there. Some of the tools and checklists from the prior editions are available. So each chapter has resources available online from the prior editions that provides a continuity to the new book, and yet builds on treating principles as the core of engaging in utilization-focused evaluation.
So we have one question here from Zach. Can you speak to the relationship of UFE as a decision-making framework, approach, evaluation model as it relates to other models and purpose distinctions like developmental evaluation, principles focus, and Blue Marble evaluation?
Well, great question. And all of those other approaches really came from utilization-focused evaluation. So that developmental evaluation emerged when I was working with a philanthropic leadership program under a contract to do formative and summative evaluation. And it turned out that they didn't really want to do a summative model. They wanted to keep adapting because it's a leadership program and needed to continue to change and be updated. And so developmental evaluation was serving a new need. And when you're doing a high degree of adaptation and development, instead of following a highly prescriptive model, it turns out that those people who are doing innovations and adaptations are very principles driven. So principles-focused evaluation, again, emerged out of utilization-focused evaluation, as did Blue Marble evaluation, as we got more involved in international work. Charmaine has a background in international work. And together we saw that the ways in which what's happening locally was affected by what's happening globally required a perspective on evaluation that was global in nature. It emerged out of utilization-focused evaluation. So each of these approaches remains basically utilization-focused. I always treat that as the umbrella to inform the other kinds of approaches that have emerged, but they're all based upon utilization-focused evaluation. And we describe that emergence in the book in part 3 that we're going to talk about here in a moment, the new directions that have emerged since since the last edition was in 2008, the 4th edition. So all of those other books, developmental evaluation, principles-focused evaluation, blue marble evaluation, have come out since the 4th edition of UFE. So a lot has changed in the field, and that's what this reflects.
Wolfgang asks about users who are not yet born or very little child, the tension between blue marble principles and UFE principles. And I'll say again, in the last section of the book, we talk about this balancing of your user's priority with priorities, bigger picture contextual priorities of equity and sustainability. I know we've got Andrea, Lisa, and Beverly on here who talk a lot about the rights of nature, and so we're balancing your immediate user client with thinking about all of the whole world and that blue marble as also a key foundational piece of your evaluation. And so it's finding the connections and the balance and potentially pushing your users to think more about those things if they are not. So we're not strictly, we talk a little bit about, not strictly only addressing the things that, a specific client wants, but thinking a little bit more broadly about the idea of users. Do you want to say anything more about that, Michael?
No, you covered it well.
Okay. We'll do a few more questions before we move on. Could you maybe give some concrete examples for prioritizing use in contrast to when use is more of a byproduct?
So the principle of being utilization focused from beginning to end is what I found in my practice and with other evaluators using use as a framework is that the notion that you're going to figure out what to do with an evaluation after it's done turns out not to be very useful because what we have found is that if you don't know what you're going to do with an evaluation before you get it, you're not likely to know what to do with it after you get it. I find that one of the biggest barriers to use, and Charmaine and I talk about this and write about it in the book, is a compliance mentality, is simply going through the motions of evaluation. It's required, it's mandated, it's paperwork, it's strings attached to the money. And so the initial big barrier that we talk about in getting people involved with thinking about use is breaking down the mindset that this is all compliance activity, that they're actually going to use it. And along the way, we do a number of things to encourage people to think about use. For example, before gathering data, doing simulations of use, making up, fabricating potential results, and engaging with people. If the results came out this way or that way, what would you do with them? And time again, when running that exercise, even after working with people 2 or 3 months to design the evaluation, create the measures, get the methods, decide what the overarching questions are, all utilization focused, we do that simulation with fabricated data, and somebody will look at me and say, wow, you're actually expecting us to use this. And that dress rehearsal gets at the learning involved in going from data to use. It's not a natural process. It involves a lot of facilitation. So it helps people actually get in touch with what decisions they're going to make. And part of the dysfunction that has emerged around timing, we opened the book with this problem of the formative summative prescription with most international and even many national evaluation contracts, government contracts, philanthropic contracts are written for midterm and end of program evaluation that comes from formative and summative. But what that means is you're simply arbitrarily saying that halfway through a 3-year or 5-year period, you're going to see how things are working. There's nothing magic about that. That's simply an administrative convenience. And that at the very end, there'll be a summative judgment about whether the thing worked altogether. But in fact, decisions about what to do next, whether to continue a program, expand it, go to scale, cannot be made at the end. They typically have to get made months, even as much as a year or more before the program is ended. There's staff considerations, staffing, relationships, funding. And so we've gotten into this bind of scheduling and commissioning evaluations on the basis of administrative convenience, midterm and into project, without attending to how evaluation can get connected to organizational strategic processes, organizational budget processes, and organizational adaptation processes as things change for them. And that the evaluation then has to adapt as the context changes.
We'll do one more question, sort of smishing two in one. I think Ricardo talks about the dimensions of readiness that he's found very fundamental. And we tackle that both in the contextualized principle about understanding the context, which is not just the broader world context, but the context of in which the evaluation can occur and the people involved, as well as the personalized piece. And so thinking about readiness from an organizational or initiative standpoint is folded within that. And then when you think about, Bob brings up the apparent contradiction between intended users and adapt. And I think the reason these are principles that you're paying attention to in an ongoing way is you're not thinking about intended users one time and then those are the only users and then you've moved on to the next stage. But that your understanding of who the intended users are may also adapt. As you said, they may be changing as the context changes. And so it's that ongoing attention to who are the uses, who are the users, what are the uses, and how are they evolving over time is really important in this.
A good example of that is from the World Food Program has just been engaged in a developmental evaluation of the organizational response to COVID that was meant to inform the organization's ongoing adaptive strategy. And as they did interviews with field staff early on, it rapidly became clear many of these people were on short-term assignments for the World Food Program that were supposed to be a month or 6 weeks, but because of quarantine, travel restrictions, some of them had ended up being in lockdowns for 8-9 months, separated from family, not able to travel. The interviews were turning up enormous stress and trauma among people. And so immediately the evaluation team had to go through trauma-informed interviewing, and immediate feedback to the World Food Program was about the ways of using evaluation findings to help support traumatized and stressed staff in real time, not waiting for the report, but to use it immediately to understand the depth of challenges that people are facing. And the organization was responding and dealing with that. And so the staff in the field became users of the feedback that was intended originally to be an evaluation primarily focused at upper management levels.
Great, thank you for the great questions. We'll continue on here. We've got one more trivia question for you. What character represents the evaluator in the UFE cartoons? See if I can find it here. There we go. Y'all are doing pretty well here. Jester, 75%, well done. There is, I will say, if you've read Eva the Evaluator, there is a portrayal of superhero evaluators. So, you know, you're not totally off base there, but the, in UFE, it's the Jester, and here the Jester is. Do you want to explain that a little bit, Michael? Why the evaluator is the Jester?
Well, in medieval times, the role of the jester was to get truth to the monarch when monarchs tended to surround themselves by people who just told them what they wanted to hear. And that wasn't very helpful for making wise decisions. Now, of course, political leaders today would never do that, surround themselves by people who simply feed their ego and buy into their distortions of reality. But apparently in medieval times, that was a problem. And so the jester's job was to get the truth to the monarch and that required communication skills, good humor. And it turns out their personnel evaluation was if they didn't do a good job of that, they weren't around anymore, not just in terms of job, but in terms of life. So the high stakes of gesturing. And I have a blue marble evaluation jester. I don't know if this can be seen on camera.
Yeah, we
but
can
it's
see
a sculpture that shows the jester trying to balance the various parts of the world's. And this was done by a sculptor in Minneapolis, very close to where Charmaine lives. While we're doing show and tell, I should show people, as Charmaine discusses part 3 of the book, yesterday afternoon, the book arrived. Helen Salmon went to great efforts from Sage to get an actual physical copy of the book. And it was delayed getting out because ink was one of the things that's become held up in the ports and in being able, the challenges right now in distributing goods, the holdups in shipping, ink was held up. And so the book was delayed in getting printed, but it is out. I'm holding a physical copy of it. And I'm very pleased to actually have it. Thanks to Helen for getting it to me.
And there's also an ebook that probably could avoid a lot of those issues. So, you know, we've got both options for you. So the third and final part of the book takes on new directions and in evaluation and in utilization-focused evaluation. And we begin with the contemporary context around misinformation and the high stakes of evaluative thinking, looking at how, you know, that concept of living in a post-truth world and social media and the spread of falsehoods, and how do we understand the role of evaluation within that context? What is the evaluator's role in those conditions? So we offer the UFE perspective in chapter 17. And then in the following chapter, we make the case that evaluation can and must indeed be used to contribute to a more equitable and sustainable world. It's no small claim, and it's certainly, we are not the first to do it. This chapter has been informed by many colleagues who have worked tirelessly to call attention to the importance of values and culture and social justice and evaluation, like Bob Stake, Nicole Bowman, Donna Mertens, Karen Kirkhart, Rodney Hobson, Jardine Coffey, Vidya Shankar, many, many others. So we've embraced these works and attempted to situate UFE within the global context of the climate crisis, exacerbating global inequalities, COVID-19, the list goes on. And so under crisis conditions, the question is really whether evaluation will be part of the problem or part of the solution. And we offer our vision of evaluation and utilization-focused evaluation as part of the solution. And then in chapter 19, we build on that, where we consider evaluation for transformation. And for our Blue Marble evaluation friends, this will not be anything new to you, but we wanted to be sure that it was very central to thinking about the next generation of UFE. Transformation has become a clarion call on the global stage. And so this really looks at how evaluation is responding to the climate crisis, the racial justice crisis, and how we really look at evaluation's role with potential contribution to global and local systems of transformation. So Blue Marble Evaluation, the book certainly elaborates on that, but it has a very strong foundation in UFE, as we talked about earlier. And then we conclude with a review of the principles and sort of what we've learned, how they connect with the new and emergent directions to try and bring it all together, and really kind of explores the developmental trajectory of UFE within the context of our current situation, our current society. So that's where we wrap up. Anything you want to add there? Oh.
What I would emphasize is working with Charmaine and rethinking about utilization-focused evaluation 50 years later. This is a major paradigm shift that will be recognized for those of you who know it, from mainly working with intended users to find out what their information needs are, to a role where the evaluator now has a professional obligation to put equity and sustainability on the menu of evaluation criteria for all programs. Geraldine Coffey's initiative on equitable evaluation and the American Evaluation Association adopting the principles that we support equity for the common good. The International Development Evaluation Association adopting the principle that all evaluations should address sustainability. And so this means that in addition to facilitating the intended users identifying their questions, we as a profession have adopted an obligation to bring issues of equity and sustainability as evaluation criteria into every program. And that is a major shift in the role of the utilization-focused evaluator, a major shift in facilitation skills, in knowledge, and that leads to the emphasis on transformation. So this is not a, as Charmaine said, just a revision and update. This is quite a paradigm shift for the role of the utilization-focused evaluator in our current crisis environment.
So finally, you know, as we're now in the 5th edition, it's nearly impossible to identify all the people who've contributed to this over the years, but these are some of the many who either have written something for this book or who made contributions to this work. And so we want to send out a big thank you to Helen at Sage, who I know is here. Lisa's here, who did a lot of our reference editing, and there's many more of you who contributed. So we want to thank you. And we also wanted to do a little drawing for a signed copy of the book. So I'm going to make an attempt to do a random drawing here. If you pre-registered, we're going to see who gets a signed copy of the book mailed to them. All right. So our colleague Sasan Al-Zatari, I don't know if you're here or not, but I will be in touch with you. Oh, you're there. There you are. Yay. Congratulations. I'll be in touch, get your address and get that to you. And now I have to see if I can get myself back to my presentation. There we go. So, in addition to thanking you all and all of the folks who contributed to the book, we also have a surprise tribute to Michael. So Nora Murphy-Johnson and Andy Johnson, I believe, are not with us today because unfortunately they have COVID, which is very bummer news. They're doing okay, but they have been working with me, as many of you know, to pull together a tribute to Michael in honor of this huge milestone 5th edition. And so in lieu of their sharing it with you, I'm just going to give you a little sneak peek into it, Dad, and we'll send you the link so you can absorb it all. But many of you contributed. We've got poems, we've got quotes and stories and pictures about how important you have been as a colleague to so many of us, and just lots of love and gratitude to you for all that you have done for the field of evaluation and for so many of us here. So I know a lot of you who are here have contributed, but we'll be sure that the entire compilation will probably fill its own book, and we will get you a copy of that as well.
Thank you. I'm deeply moved. Thank you.
Yes. And of course, it would not be a utilization-focused evaluation celebration without a song. So to conclude our celebration, we offer a world premiere utilization-focused evaluation anthem to the tune of The Impossible Dream. So as you know, my dad loves to offer anthems and tributes, and he also really loves Broadway musicals, which may or may not surprise you. And he always finds evaluation analogies and lessons and messages within those plays. So The Man of La Mancha is an appropriate musical with a theme of imagination and idealism that are important virtues in the world in which that musical takes place, and continue to be very relevant, both to this edition and to the world we live in. So this book is based on Miguel Cervantes' classic story of Don Quixote, written in 1605, more than 400 years ago. Begins with Don Quixote believing that he is a knight errant destined to roam the world combating evil. Cervantes writes, in short, our gentleman became so caught up in reading that he spent his nights reading from dusk until dawn, and his days reading from sunrise until sunset. And so with too little sleep and too much reading, his brain dried up, causing him to lose his mind. His fantasy filled with everything he had read in his books, enchantments, as well as combats, battles, challenges, wounds, courtings, loves, torments, and other impossible foolishness. And he became so convinced in his imagination of the truth of all the countless grandiloquent and false inventions he read, that for him no history in the world was truer. So I'm going to pass it over to Michael for his UFE anthem.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you for the tribute. And I think this is it. Let's see. Yep. Oh, before I share, I need to be sure to click on the right stuff. Here we go. All right. In thinking about a celebratory song for this special occasion, I was considering a number of possibilities and was undecided right up until this week, when the cover of the New Yorker magazine came out and featured Don Quixote tilting at modern windmills. That serendipity settled the deal for me and chose for me The Impossible Dream from Man of La Mancha. As Charmaine has already set up the story, Don Quixote goes in search of adventures with his faithful companion, Sancho Panza, and along the way and throughout the book spouts various wise aphorisms, like this one. The truth may be stretched thin, but it never breaks, and it always surfaces above lies as oil floats on water. A wise aphorism for evaluation, speaking truth to power. Don Quixote comes across a great windmill, but perceives it as a giant and does battle with it and loses. And thus the phrase tilting at windmills has entered our classic lexicon. Don Quixote thinks he's doing battle with a great herd, with a great army. Others see it as a mere herd of sheep. And that's the evaluation tension in the story. Different views of reality, different perspectives of what's going on, clashing, put in alignment with each other. One view, another view. Figuring out what is real and what is illusion. Certainly continually relevant in this time. And so Don Quixote perceives Dulcinea as a fair damsel in need of rescue, a damsel in distress, while others see her as a common prostitute and poke fun at Don Quixote's affections and hallucinations. Pablo Picasso was inspired by the story of Don Quixote, as was Salvador Dali. And it led to the great Broadway play, Man of La Mancha, which concludes with a closing soliloquy, one of the most powerful of all Broadway plays, in my view, where Don Quixote has been brought back to the reality of the people in his village, the local priest, his niece, and they say to him as he is near death, "At least you'll die in touch with life as it is." And he responds, "Life as it is. I've seen life as it is. I've lived for many years now. I've heard the voices of God's noblest creatures moan from the filth in the streets. I've been a soldier and a slave. I've seen my comrades die in battle or fall more slowly under the lash in Africa. These were men who saw life as it is, and they died despairing. No glory, no bray of last words, only the look of despair in their eyes. I do not believe they were asking why they were dying, but why they had ever lived. Who knows where madness lies, when life itself seems lunatic? Perhaps to be too practical is madness, to surrender one's dreams, to seek treasure where there is only trash. But maddest of all, is to see life only as it is, and not also as it could be and should be. And so, as Charmaine and I wrote the book, we wanted to capture evaluation as it's practiced, describe what the state of the art is, but also provide a vision of evaluation as it can be and should be. For maddest of all is to see life only as it is and not also as it could be and should be. And so, as I introduce the utilization-focused evaluation lyrics to The Impossible Dream, let me first, for those who may not know the song, play a brief segment from the movie with Peter O'Toole singing to Sophia Loren.
To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go.
So that was Peter O'Toole, and now the world premiere of the utilization-focused evaluation lyrics to The Impossible Dream. A vision of evaluations used, of intended use by those intended to use, to stay focused on utilization, to refuse, to confuse or misuse, to work intergenerationally, addressing the climate emergency. Time being ever of essence, a shared sense of urgency. Evaluation as quest to serve the greater good. No matter the politics, being useful as we should, to fight for what's just without question or pause. Criteria of environmental justice, evaluators engaged in the cause. And we know it will only be true to this glorious quest to transform systems locally, evaluation at its best. And the world will be better for this. The principles deeply guide what we do, ever striving with primary intended users to stay focused on utilization.
Applause, yay. If you are able, we would love for you to turn your camera on so we can see all your faces and take a group photo. Understanding that some of you may not want to do that. Can't leave me all by myself though. Oh wait, I have to let you do it, sorry. Okay, start video. There we go, sorry about that. All right. Feel free to unmute and say hi if you want. We're going to be on multiple pages here. Great to see you all. Okay, ready? I'm going to take 2 pictures. So 1, 2, 3, cheese. I'm going to go to my next page. 1, 2, 3, cheese. And I will allow you to unmute. Right. I'm being high security. Okay, here we go.
Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yay.
Amazing.
Yay. Well done.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, everyone. Great to see all your faces.
Michael, I can't wait to see you on a Broadway performance soon.
Not likely.
think, oh, come on. We could write an evaluation of the musical.
Oh, I love it. Thank you so much and congrats.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Think about reviewing the
Thank
book,
you. It was
Sarah.
great.
For your blog.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Bye.
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 Bye now.
Bye, everyone.
Alrighty.